Okay, so I'll just get right started then. Okay. So there is a time that many adolescents in this day and age must inevitably arrive. Okay, so I'll just get right started then. Okay. So there is a time that many adolescents in this day and age must inevitably arrive at. A time when we find ourselves composing long, long odes and ballads dedicated to those to whom we feel ourselves so inextricably endeared to. We spend our times, our evenings, writing these long, long letters of romance in the hopes that our feelings may be reciprocated. College essays. I'm talking about college essays. So I was writing my college essays one time, just fumbling over all the little word choice and sentence structure, all that fun stuff, when my mother came upstairs and asked me a simple question. She said, "May I take a look?" Yeah, you don't need to see my college essays, Mom. No, please don't, please no. For some reason, I was utterly set against the idea of showing my mother my college essays. And it's not due to any shortcoming on her part. She's actually terrific at this kind of stuff. It was just so inexplicably, I just kind of didn't really want to. Eventually, I did anyway. And after I did, I was thinking to myself, why was that decision so hard for me to make? What was all that about? I mean, these are the most important essays I'm writing in my high school career. It's only logical that I get as much help on it as I can. But, I was kind of against the idea. And even when I got it back, the paper back from my mother, I privately vowed to myself, I'm not going to follow her advice. I'm doing it my way. I'm not going to follow her advice. A few days later, parents don't understand me. Like we're some kind of Lovecraftian monstrosity, kind of love beyond the reaches of human imagination. But actually, that last one's actually pretty important. Because what does it actually mean if I say, my parents don't understand me? What does that actually indicate? It indicates a disconnect, right? A disconnection. It's as if there's something that is disrupting the relationship. Somehow communication is no longer going through quite as well as it used to. Which kind of makes sense when we think about it, right? Because the teenage years, they're interesting times, to say the least. Yeah, I mean, we go around, we talk about, we demand our independence, I want to control my life. It's my life, I control it. And then we don't actually know what to do with all that independence once we actually get it. Just kind of funny. So that's why there's all this, the kind of the desire to be independent, but then we don't actually, there's a lot of contradiction going on, right? Where we have all these urges, but we don't actually know what to do with independence once we get it. So there's a lot of this contradiction. That's kind of that trademark sort of confusion that comes with transitioning into adolescence. And that's the thing. Like when kids get to that point of adolescence, they always get that kind of change going on. And because of that change, that's why they have that conflict. And the best part is that once that happens, then the parents and the teens have to deal with that conflict for another 5 years. Which, when we think about it, is really not a lot of time to have left with your child before college time rolls around. For many of us here today, the time is already less than 5 years, which is why it's important to make the most of what time remains. So yeah, that's what I'm here to talk about today. Let's get right to it. So what exactly is the root cause of the phenomenon of teenagerishness? Where does that actually come from? I mentioned all that stuff about contradictions. Where does that come from? So from my admittedly limited expertise in AP Biology and AP Psych, I can safely conclude that the cause seems to be rooted in that happy biological function we call puberty. A lot of fun stuff happens in puberty. Go through some, frankly, rather astonishing changes. We get changes in the brain chemistry and such, and as well as growing a lot of hair all over. It's terrifying. But some of the important things that happen, we may see development of sex hormones, which means that we start further developing our sexual organs, our sexual behaviors. We may also see an increase in muscle mass and bone growth, which is why teens always seem to be growing so fast, And most importantly, we also have that psychologically what happens is adolescents begin to enter into a time of self-searching, wondering like, who am I? What is my purpose in life? All that. Now all of that has a common purpose. Yeah, puberty does have a point. It's not just there so nature can laugh at you. It's ultimately what's going on is that adolescence, it's there to prepare the individual to enter into adulthood. Because from a biological perspective, what is the point of adulthood? It's there to, you can reproduce, so you can make babies, and then once you have your babies, you've got to be able to protect your babies, and when you're protecting your babies, you also need to be able to guide your babies and, lead them on a healthy lifestyle. And for all of that, you will need all that stuff I mentioned, sex hormones, muscle growth, and psychological surety of mind. So that's all that. So really what the purpose of adolescence is to prepare the individual to actually leave the current family unit so as to be able to establish a new family unit. So that's actually why, it's a key factor to why I ultimately found it so difficult to show my parents my college application essays. Because of all these physiological and psychological changes and stuff, teens end up getting that kind of, unconsciously we get that sort of, the kind of defensiveness, it's actually a bit of a kind of silly pride, where we feel that we have something to prove, that we have to be like, look, I am ready, I am ready, I'm ready to brave the world, I can do what I want. And because of that, when criticism comes, even when it's good criticism, like completely just and well-meted out criticism, we end up feeling like it's an attack on the idea that I'm ready. They're saying that I'm not ready. And the funny thing is that we're actually not ready. Which brings me to my next point. So all that stuff I mentioned earlier, about biology, about puberty and all that stuff, that's all related to the biological, the natural side to human development. However, the thing is, the human species, we're kind of funny in that we're not entirely natural. Right? I mean, the thing about, according to the theory of evolution, what most species do is that they change themselves in order to fit their environment through, natural selection, mutations, whatever else it is. But in the case of humans, we tend to change our environment to fit ourselves, right? So, for instance, consider the air conditioner. I click a button, blows out hot air. Now I can live in Heilongjiang, where the temperature is in the negatives all the time. But I can live there in a t-shirt and shorts. It's very nice. It's comfortable. So the point is, humans have been able to layer change after change onto their environments until they've created something entirely new. It's like an artificial environment, complete with all these new kind of rules going on, these social norms, social expectations. We create institutions like schools and businesses to prepare individuals to better feed back into the general populace, to feed back into and ensure that the population gets to be prosperous together. And the thing about that is, the result, therefore, is that humans are influenced not just by the biology, but also by the social influences. And it's not exactly bad, but the thing is that it's complex, right? It's complicated. And more importantly, a lone, unguided 13-year-old is probably not going to do that well there. Slight tangent, but I was doing some research a while ago on how Arctic seals raise their young. And so here's what happens. When you have an Arctic seal mother and it has its, the cute little baby seal, it's all furry and white, it's adorable. And once it begins to enter into adolescence, they take the baby, they put it on an iceberg, and that's it. They just leave him there. I personally find that hilarious. And it's ridiculous, right, from a human perspective, where you take your little adolescent child and you just leave him on an iceberg forever, and leave him there to fend for himself. It doesn't really work, does it? Right? Because the human world is so much more complicated than the adolescent mind is perhaps prepared to face. And so that's why ultimately teens do require guidance from their parents, even if they do feel that they're independent. So we come to something of an impasse. On one side, teens are biologically hardwired to desire independence, but at the same time, we're not truly ready for that kind of independence, right? We're not really ready to deal with all that stuff that comes with such a complicated world such as human society. So what do? Both sides have their point. So ultimately, because both sides have their point, we need to come to something of a compromise. Right? Now, before we go on, I will confess that as to the precise details of the compromise, I have limited expertise due to me being a teenager. I have not been a parent yet, believe it or not. So what that basically means is that I can't necessarily speak to all sides of the argument. I can, however, offer some insight into what it is that I believe we teenagers want. And I believe that what we teenagers really want and need is to feel that we're being acknowledged as being capable of greater independence than before. Which is true, because sure, we're not ready for full, complete independence, but we certainly are more capable of independence than we were before, right? Such as, for instance, in the case of us being 5-year-olds. We are 5-year-olds. We are certainly more capable of independence than that. So what does that entail? What does that actually look like in a relationship? So I speculate that perhaps parents and teens would perhaps have to see each other a little bit more as equals, actually, rather than the conventional parent-child. parents may take on something more of an advisory role, and then teens would then have the responsibility of bending our foolhardy pride to actually listen to our parents. So it has to go both ways, ultimately. So, ultimately, it has to be kind of an agreement, a desire to kind of have this change of mentality, this paradigm shift, to acknowledge each other as equals. Now, I understand that ultimately, this would also be a very difficult process. I mean, for teens to have to change, to bend their pride in order to listen to their parents, and for parents to also begin to acknowledge and let go of their children. I'm sure it would have to be very difficult for both sides. However, ultimately, this kind of acknowledgement of the changing circumstances of the relationship, that acknowledgement is ultimately a necessity. Because, parents cannot continue on in denial of the fact that their children are growing up, and teens cannot go on in denial of the fact that they're not grown up yet. So ultimately, there needs to be that kind of agreement, that mutual agreement. And you never know, as we sit down to have these discussions, you never know, it is fully possible that teens might even surprise you now and then. So yes, with that, I thank you all for listening to me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the speeches that come this day. Thank you.